All right. Okay, I'd like to welcome everyone to the June 6th Finance and Facilities Committee meeting here for the School District of Waukesha. Appreciate everyone being here tonight and on this pretty nice night. It's a little cloudy, but we'll take it, right? And hopefully that hotter weather will follow here soon. I'd like to call the meeting to order. And have we been properly posted, Darren?
Yes, we have.
And we'll start out with hearing from our constituents. Tonight we have one speaker that's signed up, and because there are 6 speakers or less, we will allow, at the 3-minute mark, we'll give you a warning, but we'll allow up to 5 minutes to finish your comments. We expect all speakers to honor our time limit, refrain from using any inappropriate language, and being respectful in their comments. Speakers who do not meet these expectations may be prohibited from speaking at future board and committee meetings. Speakers are here to address the board, not the audience. The school board and this board committee does not endorse any comments made by members of the community here tonight. We would like to remind our community members of the impact of their words on others and that our children are watching. We commit to communicating with you in a respectful and productive manner and ask that you do the same. We also expect that the audience will be respectful of the speaker and of the board and refrain from responding with verbal comments, cheering, applause, or other behavior that will detract from the meeting. Please note that no obstructions can be created between the board and the audience. Visual aids cannot be used, and the area behind the speaker and podium will be clear during public comment. Also, in order to respect our speakers and meeting participants, please silence your phones at this time if you have not. Mr. Paul Reese. Welcome, Paul.
Good evening. Kazaa, kazaa. Doesn't get much better than this. I can't get over it. This is just awesome. Tonight I want to talk about a little bit about tennis courts. We're talking about building them and how much it's going to cost and whatnot, but I just don't believe any of the quotes I'm hearing because I have friends who do construction and delivery costs are going through the roof daily. They adjust. So whatever the costs are for delivery, you could probably add $2 a gallon by the time this starts and gets going. So it's just what I have my experiences with this, and I have friends who are in concrete, and they just said the delivery costs change daily. It's just, whenever you get a quote, it's based on when it's delivered compared to the price of fuel. The other thing I want to touch on base was teachers' salaries and raises. This notion that teachers aren't getting salaries or raises is preposterous. They get raises all the time. They have a scale. They go up in their scale all the time. Unless you hit the top of the scale, you're always getting a raise. So some years, even though we say we're giving a 2% raise, they may get 4 or whatever it is because they're already sliding up on that scale. It's not one, I don't get a raise unless you guys give a raise. It's always there. It's always going up until they hit the top mark. So whenever we add on to that percentage, it's also on to whatever else they were going to get. And this notion that they're not getting anything is a nonsense. Although I will say this, our aides are grossly underpaid in this town. My son's starting pre-K and they're going to come and do a visit to our house. And the teacher's paid, but the aide is doing it voluntary. So who cares? We could discuss that on who cares more, because one has to volunteer their time in order to show up and one is paid to show up. So I don't believe that the aides in this town and this district have been paid fairly for quite some time, and they're not given, I don't even think they get benefits, and they're paid and they're underpaid. But our teachers seem to be, I think our scale, we're on the early end of getting them to the top of the scale compared to other districts in our neighboring districts. They're well compensated. They can't argue that they're not. I live in the neighborhood with a lot of them. So anyways, that's what I had tonight. Thanks.
Thank you, Paul. Moving on to our action items. We have 3 action items tonight. The first action item is the approval of the minutes from the May 9th, 2022 meeting of the Finance and Facilities Committee. Would I have a motion of approval?
So moved.
Moved by Mr. McCaffrey, seconded by Dr. Piasek. Any corrections, questions, comments? All right, Jess, please take the roll call. I will. I'm so used to roll call votes, darn. Everyone in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed? Okay, passes 5-0, Jess. Thanks for your assistance on that. Moving on to our vouchers. Sherry, did we have any questions? I know we do because you've handed me a sheet of those, so.
Yes, we do. We have several voucher questions this evening. Excuse me. The first question is for voucher 347909, Envision IT, for $17,167.50. And the question was, what is this for? It's our annual Citrix renewal fee. Citrix is the tool that allows any device, iPad, Chromebook, a phone, or a low-powered desktop PC to run Windows applications on a much more powerful server than our data center. There's certain tools within the district that we use it for. We use it to reach a version of Skyward called PAC, which is hosted by another company. We also use it to access desktops remotely if we're working from home for any reason. And EACHIEVE also uses Citrix to deliver Windows applications to remote students so that they don't have to install things right on their PCs, the Windows applications on their PCs at home. Any questions on that? That's an annual license.
That's a great product. It's been around a long time. One of those tried and true kinds of products. So thank you for that. Appreciate it.
You're welcome. Voucher 348077, Quick Trip for $1,092.50. And the question, which I know is meant in humor, seems very high for one ski trip for gas. A lot of the different clubs, they sell Quick Trip gift cards and make 5% on each one they sell, and that's the case for the West Ski Club. They were selling gift cards, and this was a bill for the gift cards. I have detailed in here how many they got for that, and they made 5% off of it.
I thought there was something interesting that would be there.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you.
A lot of the different clubs, not just the ski club, but it's such an easy fundraiser for them because we all need to buy gas, right? And for us, it's, when you're purchasing one, there's no additional charge. So Quick Trip's a good partner with that. Okay. Next.
Sherry,
Yes.
Can I just clarify? So we purchased $1,000 worth of gift cards that they sold
Yes.
and made 5% off of that,
Yes.
like $50?
$57.50, I think it was in total.
Well, that's a lot of work for.
These fundraisers usually aren't that much work because you get the people that order them all the time. They don't have to, once their supporters know that they're selling them, it's pretty easy for them. We did it at my old school, and it was so successful because people just, I have to buy gas anyways, I might as well support the school. But
So from an accounting perspective, can you talk to us about what that process is coming through from the school through central office?
I didn't ask Wes specifically about theirs. I know at my old district, and I'm pretty sure it works the same for all, they take orders for the cards and then purchase the cards and deliver them to the people. That's what we did, but I'm pretty sure you have to pay up front for the cards, and you can buy them and then turn around and just sell them, but then you risk having leftovers on them. So generally, it's a pre-order thing where people have, they call them scripts, and they place an order for the gift card in advance and pay for it.
And then that money would go directly into that student's personal account for that club? Or
It would go into the club account, the
Okay.
overall club account, and then the club pays for the cards out of that same account.
Okay, gotcha. And some clubs do, though, keep track of individual
Yep.
personal amounts too, right, for each student?
Yes.
Whether
that
this one
generally-
did or not, but,
Right, that generally depends if they've got a big trip that's coming up that kids are fundraising individually for, then they set up their own little internal accounts that they keep track of, nothing we keep track of at the business office level.
gotcha. Thank you. Anything else on this one?
All right, the next one is for Texas Women's University for $2,334. And the question was, what was this for? It was a college course, and the answer is yes, it was a college. It was for 3 college credits, and this is for one of our Title I teachers who's certified in reading recovery. Now, there's another program called DLL, and I apologize, I'm not going to even try to say, I wrote down here what that stands for, but I will butcher it if I try to say it, so I apologize. But it's a program that is dedicated to bringing reading recovery into bilingual situations like we have at the school district. And so the teacher, in this case, is getting certified, and she's being certified in this program, plus as a leader, meaning she can bring back to the district what she has learned and teach other teachers within the district for this program. And what I read about it and what I talked to Trish Goodspeed about it, sounds like a pretty exciting program, and it's meant to really catch students in first grade that before they get too far behind. So this particular university is the only one certified in the United States that offers both virtual and then an in-person component where they bring people here after the learning has happened. And that's required for the certification, I believe.
Yeah, that train the trainer kind of approach we use in other areas too, and I think it can be quite effective. It'd be interesting just over time, maybe just, is it Tricia you said?
Yes.
Maybe you could have her give me a call, and I'd just like to know, just have a follow-up call with respect to how often then would this person provide training to others, kind of what that looks like.
I can certainly do that.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions on that? All right, then the next one was actually a wire through a U.S. Bank P-card purchase for $6,463.80. And this was for a company called New Motion, and this is a New Motion Easy Stand Evolve device. And this is something that allows a student, this is a special education purchase, it's a tool that allows a student in a wheelchair to be able to be upright and standing for a portion of the day. It's pretty amazing technology that's out there now. This was paid for through the IDEA flow-through grant.
Okay. Any questions on that? Okay, Sherry?
Okay. So then the next question was part of a larger conversation, but I brought back what I could today. And the question was, the largest question that I have is on the spend for technology of $711,000. As we begin to move forward, I want to begin discussions surrounding removing elementary student iPads. This begins with the current cost of the iPad and all applications. I would like to understand the current spend in May and expected cost for the next 2 years for elementary school technology. Technology cost compared to curricular costs we would have if we would have not utilized the iPads. So we had a very short turnaround time on this meeting, given the month end. So what I was able to provide was the biggest amount of these two, of the $711,000, I believe it's $706,000 of it. Part of it was for a company called Agri Repair for $118,000, and Agri Repair provides our 3-year warranties on the devices and the cases that come with it. And that was for 2,000 cases with warranties. The warranty is on the iPad, not the case, it's the iPad warranty. And then along with that was a wire, a P-card purchase for Apple for $588,000, and that was for 2,000 iPads. So in looking at this, I tried to at least come up with what does it cost to provide technology for elementary student for the life of their time in elementary school. And the cost of the iPad and with warranty and case is $353. It's got an expected lifespan of 4 years. They refresh after 4 years. Each student gets new technology. So it comes down to a cost of $88.25 per year. And so if an elementary student is with us from 4K through 5th grade, that's 7 years of cost, so it would be $617.75 for the technology of that student. Now, in 4K, their devices stay at school. They don't go home with them. They stay at the classroom, but it's still a cost to the district to provide that. This doesn't include any of the cost of the applications. The applications are going to be a much bigger thing to dive into because the applications vary greatly on the grade that the student is in, special education. There may be specific apps for students depending on their IEPs or their needs. So that is going to take longer to look into how much do those applications cost and then to work on finding out replacement costs for non-technology type curriculum.
We thought, because it will be all over the place, we thought maybe we would just do like 3 or 4 or 5 scenarios of students and just kind of derive an average application cost, maybe one special ed, or to give you some idea, but because it is all over the place, so.
So I think
Okay.
that the bigger piece for me is really understanding, and this is going to be a conversation that will roll over to T&L, right? Because that's really where the heart of this comes. But for a 4K student to have an iPad, and as we take a look at academic proficiency and where we're going, I want us to take a good look at what are we doing for their achievement, knowing that much of what we're doing is rolling out additional apps, additional programs, additional things. And as we're starting to find out, and research is proving, iPads are not as helpful to the overall education of our elementary kids, especially not at a 4K level. I can understand as we start to move up, but it is something that I will cross over with T&L to try and understand what that looks like, so it's not just the cost, it's also what are we putting on there.
Okay, and we can continue to try to refine the numbers that we have for you, so.
I appreciate it, thank you.
Thank you. And that is the end of the questions.
Any other questions on the vouchers that you may have? All right, I'd be looking for a motion. Dr. Piasek? Okay. Second? Second by Ms. Reincheck. Any further discussion? All in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed? Passes 5-0, Jess. Thank you for your research, Sherry, on those questions. Moving on to our third action item tonight, looking at the approval of the intergovernmental agreement for the replacement of the Lowell Park tennis courts. And as we were talking about that, our North students use those quite a bit. And we have Ron that has come
Yeah,
back,
Ron
right?
Grawl from Park and Recs here. You want to come up to the,
And Brian,
and Brian
did
Schleif?
we have anyone else as a guest tonight?
Not for this topic, no. So I'll just quickly recap last month's conversation.
Welcome, guys.
We had talked about the need and the projected cost of $558,000 that the Park and Rec Department or the city is looking for us to share in. One of the things that and we've gone back and forth on the intergovernmental agreement a couple of times, but one of the things that we added is paragraph 4, and it goes to the comments that were made earlier related to the tennis courts and inflation's certainly out there. But the intergovernmental agreement has language in it that says that the district will pay no more than $279,000. Because as we talked, this project, whether it's inflation or soils or whatever, could go higher than that. So we're capped at a maximum $279,000 in costs. And also, one other thing, it's a 50-50 split, but the city's also putting in an LED lighting system that's not part of the amount that's being asked to be split. So I didn't do the math, but if if you roll that into the overall project costs, we're paying nowhere near 50/50. It's much less on the district's half. So I provided all the same information that we had last month. The permits that North High School secures that shows the actual usage, both in spring and fall, the quote, the timeline. The city's on a calendar fiscal year, so sometimes coming together on these projects is a little awkward, but I reviewed the timeline for the RFP process, and they've agreed to have, and it's outlined in the intergovernmental agreement, seek input, and I think Brian and the staff at North have, this last month, he provided a couple of ideas. So we're here to answer any other questions. We've added a few more pictures, actually. I went and looked at the courts right before the meeting just to make sure I had a pretty good understanding of what was out there. So we're here to answer any questions you have and hopefully seek your approval on moving forward with this agreement.
Any questions or comments that we have for our guests or our staff? Dr. Piasek.
Thank you. And it's more just from a timeline perspective, but it relates back to some of the supply chain challenges that we could potentially face on this. So we had a plan that we talked about last time as far as where the tennis team would be redirected to. What, can you just remind me what the anticipated start and finish timeline is and what would be the contingency plan if we can't make that timeline?
Yeah. Turn your mic on, right in front of you. There's a button at the base, I think. Oh, there you go.
Yes, bidding process, we would be contingent on approval, of course, because this is one step of the overall process. And it goes through our capital improvement program. Our July 1 is roughly our deadline to submit all our projects for the 2023 through 2026 time period. That's reviewed. Our finance committee looks at all the CIP, generally middle of August through September, and then recommendation is made to Common Council. Typically, the earliest I think was middle of September, typically first part of October, we have approval. So once we have approval of our capital program, which we hope this is going to be included, then we can go out to bid and secure, develop our bid documents, et cetera. What we shared with Darren was the bid results. If everything falls into place, it would be January, February of 2023, and we would have the results of the bid. And I guess that falls right into, we noted in the agreement that we try to really minimize risk, for the district. So let's say we're fortunate, I'm going to think positive, that if bids come in favorably, even if they're lower, then that cost share lowers as well. So there's I don't know what the proper term would be, but a de-escalator. So if we're under budget, you also benefit from that. So I think we try to fashion that agreement the best we could. So we'll know where we stand. If the bids are way over, then the city makes that decision as far as accepting or rejecting the bids. And there's a lot of different factors that go into that, available other funding, et cetera. But again, that's how we would address it. If we deem it's not feasible, then we would have to regroup, restructure, and rebid. We need to get the project done, so we'll cross that path. It's not the first time we've had projects that hit that impasse, and we generally always find a way to make it work out. But that's the general game plan. As far as construction, we have such wonderful spring weather. May 1 would be reasonable. We'd probably get a head start on demolition, but we would work with Brian in North High School on coordinating that. But in earnest, May 1st, completion, middle of November, as far as we can go with that. And the paving, that key part is doing the subsurface work. that would be done in the early part. That shouldn't be an issue weather-wise. And the paving, fencing can be done in any weather, really. So weather is our biggest challenge, our biggest enemy. And we're going to have a wonderful spring next year because it can't be much worse than this year. Yes. So I hope that answers the question. And then contingencies, if for some reason the courts are not playable, we do have our best option is hire. And we have 18 very nice courts with a championship center court area. That would be our plan for that season. It's the best we can do. And if there is some reason why we can't get teams going in 2024, that would be our option. Let's continue to offer that. There's no charge. Though I know that creates inconvenience from a transportation standpoint.
Thank you. Maybe a clarifying question for Brian then. So it sounds like it would affect the boys' tennis season and then the girls' tennis season in the fall.
Correct.
So what is the current plan? Can you remind me? I know we did talk about hire. Is West an option for sharing those?
You can slide the other one, too.
Yeah, I think that'll be okay. Yeah, so for the spring, hire would probably be our best option, just knowing that West's program has grown a little bit for their boys, and they don't have lights, so having the additional courts at hire would probably be our ideal scenario. We kind of piloted. We didn't really get a lot of use out of it. The spring was challenging with baseball, but we had hopes because over summer we'd used Pebble Valley. We piloted actually using one of our school routes to transport some of our athletes down to the park because it was along an existing route. Knowing that First Student, their base is not terribly far from hire, we could possibly explore with around 15 tennis players, putting them on that bus that way at the end of an existing route and getting them over is a possible solution. The nice thing from a tennis perspective is that in terms of hosting, we would have that option at hire, but all of our opposing schools, there's not a conflicting opposite match happening, or we're at different levels playing on the same field on a different night with a home and away, like we might see with some of our other sports. So I think that's manageable. And then really into the fall, a good chunk of our season is played in August with the girls, so we'd have more time flexibility. We're very fortunate 2 of our staff members currently coach, and they would have availability during the day to work, and they generally practice in the morning. So we'd be able to work a little more flexibly with West and or hire in terms of scheduling for the girls in the fall. And then their season really typically goes into the 3rd or 4th week in September. So it's not as long of a stretch where we're overlapping with the school day and things like that. So I think it's feasible. We're kind of in a position where we don't have a choice. We'll have to find somewhere. So we can certainly look at some of those options.
You've obviously put a lot of thought into it, and some creative transportation options I think would go a long way, but thank you.
Thanks.
Other questions on the agreement, processes?
Just a thought just came into my, this will actually be in our 23-24 budget year, more than likely, right? The way it sounds with the constructions. And so, just so everyone's clear that it might not be seen in our October document for our final approval, but we'll, unless our share is paid earlier on, we can always do an amendment, but just keep that in mind.
Yeah, that's something that Ron doesn't need to worry about. I saw Ron looking like.
I'll just look at the agreement. We'll take the money earlier. Actually, we stipulated it after the work is completed.
Okay.
Even 45 days after completion, and we want to make sure you're 110% satisfied with it before we would entertain that.
Well, actually, I appreciate that very much, and the ceiling too. I appreciate that very much, and we understand that the city still has a final say as to, let's say it went up 100% over, and you guys would say, well, no, we don't want to double our costs, you guys would have control over determining whether it moves forward or not, but we appreciate that, putting that in place for us, and, hopefully we won't even hit that, and we'll get to de-escalate like you had mentioned, so. Other questions or comments? Yes, Mr. McCaffrey.
Brian, are the girls still going to be able to play at those courts in the upcoming, are those courts going to be in shape for them, or are we going to try to move them to different courts before construction starts?
That's a good question.
They're bad.
They're so bad.
Yeah. Likely,
It's
probably,
a liability issue on some of those courts.
probably will depend a little bit on how many girls come out and what it looks like with how many usable courts are there for practices, but matches, we would probably look to move, just, it's not a very welcoming environment for a team coming from another school or the possibility of injury.
Right, for sure. Okay.
Other questions or comments? Or motions? Mr. McCaffrey.
I move approval of the intergovernmental agreement for the replacement of the Low Park tennis courts.
Is there a second to that motion?
I'll second.
Second by Dr. Piasek. Further discussion? Okay. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Passes 5-0. Ron and Brian, thank you for your hard work, and there's a lot that went into this, and we're going to keep our fingers crossed that you are a good weatherman, Ron, and next spring is really nice and smooth.
I failed this spring, so as far as being good. But thank you very much. Appreciate the vote of support, and we look forward to working on the project. I know we still have to have the full board approve it, and again, we have to go through our process as well. So this is a big, very important step, so I thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen.
And just on behalf of our coaches and players and our families too, we do get a lot of feedback on this topic, and I know they'll appreciate the sign of support with this, and thank you.
Thank you.
All right, moving on to our discussion and information items tonight. We do have 5 of those. We're going to start with the district heating, ventilation, and air conditioning report. Darren, are you going to lead us off on that?
Yes, just share my screen quickly here.
Who are our guests this evening?
Yeah, this is the leadership, I know some of you have probably met them before. This is a good opportunity, and before I forget, we plan to come back at the end of summer, early fall, and just kind of give an update on there's been a lot of changes over at the service building and things we're doing and how we're doing it, but that's a whole nother report. But we have Kyle McCarthy, who's our maintenance manager, and Chad Caribou, who's our custodial manager. They co-lead the service building, and then Joe Hines is our lead with our HVAC team. So let me get.
What'd you call them, the A-team?
That's right.
The A-team.
All right.
Depends on the day.
Got it.
It can vary, but it's usually AA plus in my mind, so.
All right.
There we go. So this is really a follow-up conversation from last fall and even maybe back into last spring. As part of our COVID response, and the issue of HVAC had come up then. If you recall, well, I'll start walking you through the slides. The first 4 or 5 slides is history, so I apologize for those of you who've maybe heard this 4 or 5 times. So in calendar year 2020, the board directed us to look at our systems, and in the climate at that point was a lot of districts were running out and looking at plasma ionization and all these more new wave approaches. But we made the recommendation, and the board supported that, was to put that equipment onto our existing equipment. allow that new equipment to really hit its peak performance. And then we really needed to start with learning what we're doing, what we have, and kind of get an inventory in a document, which Ring and Do then did complete to move forward from. And I know that slowed the timeline, but I'm confident that was a better approach for us because I've heard mixed results with some of the high-tech stuff that was put into schools as a knee-jerk reaction. So the Ring and Do study is in board docs for you to look over at your leisure. So one other thing that I think is important for people to know where we've been on this topic, and prior to, I would say, certainly prior to COVID, maybe a little more time than that, everything we talked about in terms of HVAC was energy savings. Remember the energy manager and turning off fans as soon as you could and lowering air circulation rates and all of those things. So when people say, well, why are you doing this? I think it's important that they understand for decades, at least the 90s through, I would say, the mid-2015-ish range, that was our approach. But obviously, with COVID, and I would say even leading up to COVID, that was all changing. It was getting into a healthier work environment. Not that we didn't have a healthy work environment before. Increasing exchange rates, more efficient equipment, all those things. So the conversation in my mind in the last 5 or 6 years has really changed, and that's what's leading us here tonight. Quick snapshot of the district. We have 13 elementaries, 4 middle schools, 4 high schools, and 5 auxiliary or idle sites, and about 2.4 million square feet of space to look at and be concerned about. And they're all different. Every building is the same. We met just prior, Joe, Kyle, and I said things that we can never say is at every school, all the time, everywhere, this is happening, because it's just not the way we're structured. Every building's a unique situation. Here's a snapshot of our systems percentage by building. Steam, hydronic, and forced air. Some of those are offered, a couple of those could be offered in one building.
Yep.
Maybe here we even have all 3. I don't know, there's a lot of things going on, so it's never as simple as you think. Air conditioning's become a larger topic than it was, say, 15, 20 years ago. So this is a breakdown of our schools that have, the blue piece of the pie, 28% of our schools have 100% AC. And then the range goes down, 75 to 99% of the buildings covered with AC, all the way down to less than 50%. So it's spread out and it varies by school, obviously. But also, when you look at our systems, we were talking about Hillcrest, I think was the school we were talking about. Getting to 100% is very difficult because in the center of the building, we might be able to cool it, but all the exterior rooms might have unit ventilators that aren't designed for cooling. So it's not as simple as coming and putting a central air unit like you do in your home and you're good to go wall to wall. We also might not get to 100% even at our middle schools at Butler and Horning, right off the top of my head. We made the decision not to cool the gyms. So we may never get to 100% cooling in those buildings, even though the rest of the building is brand new HVAC system, wall to wall, other than the gyms. So again, kind of all over the place. But we do have some AC, and some of it's hodgepodge at different sections, and you wonder how we got here, but somehow we did. So for those people who are asking questions, and I appreciate the feedback we're getting and the questions we've gotten so far, because I think they've all been very fair. But in the last handful of years, and a lot of this was referendum financed, actually all of it was, except for the duct cleaning. This is all the HVAC work we've done, and the referendum was very middle school focused. But we've spent nearly, and these are just the big parts, so I can probably safely say we're over $11 million in HVAC upgrades in the district. So last fall, we talked about, we had kind of had this ultimate goal that we set for ourselves of getting to a standard level of filtration of MERV 13 district-wide, and where, again, not every heating system is the same. So where we could do it, get to a standard threshold, that was kind of a vision we had. And then we also agreed at that time to invest in building-wide, large service area equipment upgrades versus small classroom by classroom equipment, because, at least in my opinion, a lot of those things might have fit a situation, but they're not a long-term solution to the challenges that we may face or the goals that we may have. So again, we identified all the major air handling units that could get to MERV 13. Again, not every, we only can go as far as the equipment was designed to go, so. And then we talked about these large air handling units, 16 of them coming from the ring and do study. Our staff looking at 4 additional units. And obviously the costs go up, but these were just things that we started talking about. But if you remember the timing of that conversation, I want to say it was October. We might even I want to say it was October we talked about it last. We decided to just move ahead with the filtration and the duct cleaning and those types of things at that time. Here's a page from, and I know it's kind of hard to read, the ring and do study, and MERV 13 is the one with the arrow by it, but we got to the level where it was catching or had the possibility of catching the COVID virus, which is measured 0.1 microns. So that was why we targeted that. It's not the lowest level, it's not the highest level, but we thought that was a level that our equipment could handle, and we could be pretty well assured that it could be uniformly rolled out. And again, for anyone who wants to read more about that, it's in the ring and do study. The last dollars of the referendum, let me bring this a little bigger. Was duct cleaning, the MERV 13 upgrades, and then coming back and air balancing the buildings as well. This is just the elementaries, but we have it for the rest. There's a lot of completes there. We're basically done with that work except for duct cleaning at the high schools.
North High School is the only one we have left.
Yeah, and we're hoping to, once school's out, to be able to get in there and get that completed as well. Just scroll down so people can see the other schools. We have a few notes, but again, I think this went very well, and hopefully is making a difference. So I thought I'd share that. For people who are looking at this in board docs, this is a separate PDF from the slide deck that's in your board docs, so just keep that in mind if you can't find it. How do I get back?
Quick question, Darren.
Yeah.
Who is doing the duct cleaning? Who are we contracting?
Air maintenance was selected.
This is somebody we've worked with before or someone new?
It was somebody new.
Okay.
Yeah, we went through an RFP process for all that work, and they were the winning. And I don't know if they did any referendum work for us. I don't think so.
Air maintenance didn't do any referendum
Yeah.
work with us.
So again, that slide is that separate PDF for anyone who's
How much did we spend on that, Darren?
264,000 for the duct and coil cleaning and the outside air balancing.
Okay. Yes, Ms. Ryanchek.
Thank you. Darren, the 11 million that we spent in HVAC upgrades, is that just since 2018?
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think we did work, I didn't go back that far, but I want to say around 2014, there was some work done through Siemens.
Yeah.
And I don't know the number, but I'm sure there was a fair amount of HVAC work that was completed at that time.
Yeah, I think that whole energy program was 8 million?
Yeah. That sounds
8
right.
point some million?
It wasn't all HVAC probably, but a significant amount of it was likely.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah,
where you're gonna get the savings from, right?
2014-ish, rolled over a couple of years.
So, so here's the finding of, this is just one page, and again, it's all in the complete document from Ring and Do. When you have these studies done, there's always you have to identify a expected useful life or lifespan of the equipment. I freely say that sometimes those studies put that number rather low because, I don't know, they want you to replace. But where I ask them then, I go, well, list the equipment we have that is 2 times the anticipated life, because then I think that's a more valid number or a more critical need. But the way it fell, and we didn't tell them what to use, that wasn't our approach, it was their expertise, their study. But they said 93% of all of our air handling units were beyond their anticipated lifespan, 28% were 2 times. That doesn't mean that the equipment's not working. We had heat, air was being exchanged, but when you get to be 2 times the anticipated life, there is an end life for equipment. And when it comes to HVAC, just like your home, you kind of like to choose when that's going to happen rather than cold temperatures or something else choosing that for you. So just something to keep in mind. And I put this in here just as a, because I think it's fair, especially when people come to a topic that they're just coming to us and they haven't heard our previous conversations, well, what have you been doing? So I added this third bullet. When looking at these percentages, please keep in mind that just a few years ago, these data points would have been seen as a measure of a sound maintenance program and maximizing district equipment. It wasn't that long ago. Would have been a badge of honor in many ways. But it's a new day. Expectations are different. Energy costs are different. There's a whole lot of other things going on. So these are the numbers that came from the study. This is from the presentation that we made to F&F, I believe, last September. The Ring and Do report identified 4.8 million. The second line, the 860,000, some of that work's already been done, but the larger equipment's still there to be identified. Staff went through and identified these additional units that could be identified, or what we would consider the top tier. Now we can focus in deeper into that tier and break that into pieces as well, but I think it's important for us to look at the entire list of things that we think should be done. And these are just the totals. And I've gotten some questions from, I believe it was our workshop in October, about the initial ESSER plan, and I put forward $9 million of ESSER from that, and I think I should state the purpose of that report wasn't as much to say, board, we need to do this, was to help frame a conversation of what we could spend ESSER on. So just for anyone who might have a question. But one thing about these numbers, we touched on inflation before, these are 2021 numbers. I don't know if you add 10, 20% to this, but I doubt it's lower. But keep that in mind too as we look at possible next steps. So after that, as we sit down and we go through the equipment needs in our prioritization, you get into what I consider vertical growth and scope versus horizontal. Vertical is we just go down that list of air handling units and replace them all. Horizontal is you go through, you look at controls, you look at balancing, you look at equipment, you look at AC. This is our chance if we're going to do a large reinvestment in HVAC. This is the time to talk AC and not 2 years from now, because that card's been played. So we need to strike that balance. I tend to be leaning more towards the horizontal, especially when it comes to the controls, because I think you'll maximize our ability to monitor the systems and maximize the efficiency of those systems if the controls are there guiding it, and we're not on pneumatics still and all that type of thing. So, but those are conversations that we can have at a later date. So what I see going forward, and we're kind of doing this first bullet already, we did it again this last few weeks, is going through the Ring and Do study, but also see what are we actually identifying in the field in terms of maintenance costs. Ring and Do really went through and said equipment that needs to be replaced, but they didn't go through, because we didn't ask them, well, what if gyms aren't as high a priority, especially at the elementary level or things like that. So that's really where we come in to identify, and why I point that out is the Ring and Do study to me is a guide. It's not, this is it. This isn't the plan. It's a guide to help us identify the older equipment. But then we have, I think, an obligation as a leadership team to go through and say, okay, gyms aren't number one. We'd rather cool a library or instructional spaces or things like that. Prioritization of the equipment would be based on, but not limited to, the following. How is it performing? Efficiency and scheduling is, if we go into one building, is it more efficient? Is it more cost effective to maybe take priority 1 and priority 6 and do them at the same time? Is it more cost effective? We'd have to identify those units to come up with that. Again, we would target large scale, large service area equipment, controls where it makes sense to do it. It might not in every building. And then air conditioning, again, to be considered in areas where it's, it makes sense to do it. But that's the board's call on that. Proposed next steps. At the July F&F committee meeting, we would like to bring a prioritized list of HVAC equipment upgrades forward. We would like to begin, and really what's driving the decision at this time is we would like, if the board has interest in making a major investment like this, and it, again, doesn't have to be $9 million. It can be a smaller amount. We can take this in phases. But we need to get the design work going to get to an RFP, probably in early fall, to better ensure an install in August of 2023. Some of these units might be more off the shelf, is my understanding. Some of them might be designed specifically for our facilities in the area we're asking them to cool. So I think the timeline is more sensitive. But I didn't want to come to you tonight with that. This is a big topic, big investment, not a one-meeting conversation. So, and then a financing plan would also be presented at F&F, and in all likelihood would include some level of ESSER funding. So I thought I'd just mention that because it's big dollars quickly. But how much that comes in the form of ESSER, I think we have some legwork to clarify that. But I think we more than likely would be asking for some. So we're here. The people who know our buildings better than anyone, to answer any questions you might have or ideas you might want us to look at, or say this isn't the time. I'm fine with that as well, but we just need to know. Not tonight, but.
What questions do we have? Yes, Carrie.
So I'm a little surprised that with all of the planning and the research that we've done to this point, that we would still not even be able to really move forward for a year. So if we take a look at a plan in July, right, is there pieces of that plan that we can say over the next 4 months, we can start to build in versus having a plan that doesn't even get implemented? We don't know what the costs are going to be a year from now and not locking that all in. I understand going to RFP, but there are some things that I think that we can address sooner. And so when you're doing kind of that bridge of a timeline on phasing, what is the cost, where do we think we can go, it'd be ideal to see if there's low-hanging fruit that we can start to make some impact sooner than waiting until next year.
Yeah, and when I talk about next summer being the install date, I'm thinking the larger air handler units. Now, controls and things like that might be a different conversation if you guys have anything to add on that. Those things maybe can be quicker, but the larger units, I just don't want to overpromise that it's going to be done any sooner than that, because that's not the impression we're getting. Plus, some of those units you just can't install with, if it's a helicopter install, and for example, you can't have the kids in the school, so it'll be a summer thing. But you guys have anything to add to that, or?
A lot of those resources are in motion in other areas, so to try to get something done yet this summer would be an interruption to some of our operating systems, or if we had the time to plan for it, it would give us a little better hold on the situation.
Mr. McCaffrey?
How easy is it to get the equipment? I know that some equipment is very hard to get right now because of the chip shortage.
That's the determining factor.
Right.
It is really, we're finding ourselves up against the wall on some of the even smaller equipment.
Yeah.
Or parts for that matter.
Right.
Or existing equipment.
Yeah.
So really need to get a time out there and get a feel for what equipment is available, size, its design and its, what we're gonna utilize it for.
Right. I know some of the controls are tough to get to. Now that the low-hanging fruit is, a lot of it's not even available right now.
That,
I mean,
you're 100%.
Regular home furnaces are tough to get, and so are refrigerators right now, just because of the chip shortage, so. How many buildings do we have on pneumatic? Is South still?
Nope, South was converted, I believe, in 2015.
Okay, that was part of the Siemens project, okay.
The largest one out of our district yet is North High School. It's still has a fair amount of pneumatic control there.
Okay.
And then a couple of elementary schools, I'm gonna say maybe a half dozen,
Oh, okay.
so
And we'd be looking at replacing all that
that's
under this proposal.
that'd be our intent.
Okay.
We didn't wanna operate on antiquated controls. A lot of it either is worn or not calibrated,
Right.
giving us the efficiency that we're looking for,
Right.
so.
Thank you.
Dr. Piasek?
Of the 16 systems that would be slated to be replaced, I understand they're all outside 2 times the expected service life. Are they prioritized in some way for you all?
We would actually go through and reprioritize that list, because a lot of the ring and do stuff was age-based, which isn't a bad start, but I don't know if that's the best way to finish the list or refine it. And we could be coming back with recommendations outside of the 16 for some of the units that we find more problemsome than the 16 that ring and do recommend.
Thank you.
I know I would be interested in seeing next month what that list would look like. There's no harm in putting that together, seeing what some more details are. You guys did a great job of summarizing what we've done in the past. Some things just take some time to evolve here, and as you had pointed out, Darren, technologies change and money situations change, and our approaches change over time too. So we do have a window of opportunity here to make a substantial leap, if you wish, in the safety of our children. And these are components that if they do break down, it's not like our home. Okay, you call Tom's Heating and the next day they're coming over with another unit. It just doesn't work that way for these large industrial systems. So I do think we need to keep moving forward on this and continue to receive more details. So I would be looking forward to more details next month. I'm not sure how the other committee members feel on this. Okay. Yes, Dr.
Just
Piazza.
one thing, if I could add, the other trade-off that I think is really important, and you alluded to it, Darren, is that there's an efficiency gain, obviously, with new technology, but there's an efficiency trade-off when we get to the higher filtration rates and some of the equipment and that sort of thing. So that understanding of what the cost to operate, what some of the additional service costs would be very helpful also.
And I think that's what we were trying to shoot for at Ring and Do. They were trying to hit kind of that spot of, we're Wisconsinites, right? We want value. We want bang for our buck. We don't want to overspend. but we're willing to spend, but we got to see what we get for it, and we need the complete picture for that, so.
So we'll bring back a prioritized list. We're trying to gather updated financial information as well, because the costs are moving, to give you a better idea of what we're looking at. So we'll come back with a report in July, and we'll see where it goes from there. If everyone's all right with that.
Okay. Anyone else? All right, thank you, guys. The A-team, appreciate all the hard work.
Like I said, we'll be back in September or so, kind of recap what we've been doing about the service bill. These will be important.
We'll also thank Darren and his team too, and Darren and the central office team, I should say. Right, you have one big team.
Thank you.
All right, moving on. Our next discussion topic is our district food service program. Darren, are you going to take that, or Sherry, you?
I'll take it.
Take it away.
Excuse me. I would like to introduce Beth Ann England, who is our district manager for our Aramark account. And Jill, do you want to come up too, or no? Just-
Yeah, I mean, they can absolutely come up, sure. Here. We've got Jill and we have Angela. Jill is our chef and Angela is our dietitian. Can you hear me okay? Is this on?
So we brought them in this month because last month when we were talking about our emergency procurement contract that we are looking to, we'll talk more about in closed session, there were several questions that were posed, and I put the questions down on, just as a reminder, but obviously you can ask anything you want, and they're here to share a little bit of information on a quick presentation, and then open it up for Q&A, and you can ask any questions that you would like, and then we'll discuss the contract again in closed session.
Sounds good. Welcome.
Thank you so much. I do have it printed if anyone would like a copy because I didn't get it to Sherry ahead of time.
Jesse, we're going to bring it up? Sorry, Jeff, I forgot to remind you were at that part of the evening. Is it not the document? And it's
That's
attachment
loaded.
board docs.
Okay.
Yeah, you were able to attach them.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. So my name is Beth Ann England. I am the district manager for Aramark. We also have an on-site food service director. His name is Jared Haxton. He is not here tonight. He already had a pre-planned vacation. But yes, I mentioned I have Jill and Angela here with me today. And I thought we would take just a quick opportunity to go through kind of just a recap of the school year. And then we can dive into any and all questions that you have about food service. So for the agenda, I have kind of 4 sections here. We have student engagement, participation, and some financial information, people, and then focused on the future. So jumping right into student engagement, we just have a bunch of photos here to kind of highlight some of the fun, exciting things that we're doing. The first kind of cluster of pictures is around curbside meal service that continued through summer of 2021. And some of our student employees had some fun with costumes that I just thought I would share with the dinosaurs. And then some of the students have smiley faces over them because I didn't know if we had photo releases for them, so I apologize for not checking into that ahead of time. I just wanted to cover their faces to protect their privacy. And then we have Diane over at Les Paul serving up breakfast, and then just a photo of a kickin' beef and rice bowl, which is just one of our favorite rotating high school feature entrees. And then the next slide is on some limited time offers. So we do limited time offers and special event promotions at the secondary level. And this is a great way to generate some student excitement on our menus. In May, we had a limited time offer of a banh mi, turkey banh mi sandwich. And so on the left, there's the picture of the banh mi, and then we have some of the marketing promotion collateral in the middle. And then we have a calendar down below of just kind of, we're really systematic and process oriented when it comes to student engagement and scheduling the promotions and making sure that we hit on the promotions and then some of the special events as well. And then the next slide is really, this is kind of hard to see. It's like shrunken down on this, but it's just an example of like our Aramark limited time offer marketing kit. It comes with recipes, it comes with the build diagrams for our team. It comes with signage and like the station clings, and then also the placement strategy. So it also goes into the marketing strategy and how we can really promote and generate some excitement for some of these items. So it may seem really simple to see a turkey banh mi on the menu, but there's a lot of strategy and content behind it. So, the next slide, yeah. So this is an example of a middle and high school sampling event that we recently did. This one was chicken dumplings and yakisoba noodles, if I said that correctly. They are whole grain, but it's a new product that's coming out. So we wanted to sample it and see how it went over, and the initial feedback was really well. The students loved it. So we just had some photos here to share from that. And so previous slides were really for the secondary schools. This is the really elementary. And when we promote to elementary school students, we are promoting wellness. It encourages, all of our collateral encourages students to lead a healthy lifestyle and create lifelong positive habits. And so we promote nutrition, health, and wellness messages. So some are simple, like you will never forget being kind, and others are, about starting with a good breakfast and can kick off a great day. So those are kind of some of the materials that you'll see in the schools. And then this was fun. This happened during School Lunch Hero Week, which was the first week in May. So this is just Beth over at Meadowbrook was surprised by some students that had individual cards for her to show their appreciation for the National School Lunch Hero Day. So that was a really sweet moment. And then during National Teacher and Staff Appreciation Week, we had students at every school that actually helped include our lunch ladies in their appreciation, which was really fun. They brought candy and cards to our staff as well, which is really nice. And then the next section goes into meal participation. So I've got 2 slides on participation numbers, which is kind of our key performance indicator that we measure ourselves by. And then the next slide is really more on financials. But this breaks it down into the different meal category types that we serve. So we've got breakfast, lunch, after-school snack, and equivalent meals, which is like a la carte purchases that we turn into a meal equivalent. And so comparing last school year to this school year, with both of the years being universal free, we saw a huge increase in participation still even over last year. And you can see in each category type, we've increased participation. Breakfast, the driver was really breakfast in the classroom, grab and go at the secondary sites, and then just these past few weeks in the spring here, we had the final 8 elementary schools start offering breakfast as well. And then at lunch, we did see quite a decrease at the high schools with the consolidation to 1 lunch period for the lunch category, and then we saw the equivalent meals go up, so the a la carte purchases were increasing. But then we also saw a large increase at the elementary and middle school lunch participation as well. So it says 17% increase, but it was a hefty lift at the elementary and middle school, and the high school participation did decrease. This is small, I'm sorry. This is really tiny to see. This is how we look at the district return. So the left section is kind of our Aramark invoice calculation. You have a fixed meal rate, or we have a fixed meal rate here in Waukesha. So breakfast meals times the fixed meal rate is how our invoice is calculated. Same thing with lunch, snack, and equivalent meals. And then the commodity refund. And then if you go over to the district income calculation, we have the federal reimbursement rates. And I had to break this down into 2 sections because July 1st through December 31st, the rates were at one level, and then after January 1st, the federal reimbursement rates increased again. So that's like the green and the blue that you see up there as well. And then, so if you take the federal reimbursements and the cash sales from any a la carte sales and decrease our expense, you can see we've returned just over $2 million to the Fund 50 this year. And that's before anything else is charged into the Fund 50. So if there's equipment or like an oven or stove breaks down, that's before that expense. And then I've just got 2 slides on our people. I think it's important that you understand what's happening in our industry as well. So across the board, we've seen industry-wide food service shortages. I'm sure you've seen at local restaurants and establishments that sections of restaurants are closed because they can't find servers. So we're experiencing the same thing. So we have addressed this head on. We have increased wages slightly, but tonight we're also proposing the market wage adjustment with our agreement. But we've been promoting open positions on food service website, yard signs in front of buildings that have openings. Aramark has also enhanced Allie. She's our AI recruiting bot. So if you go to apply for a job on aramark.com, you can text back and forth with Allie, and she'll fill out your application for you and then schedule an interview. So it links right to our director's calendar, which is kind of nice. So it speeds the hire time significantly. Daily Pay, we've partnered with Daily Pay to give our employees early access to earned income, so they can access their paychecks early if they need to, instead of just waiting every 2 weeks. No late fees, no overdraft fees, or no need for payday loans. And then we currently have about 6 openings. If everyone comes to work, we've got 6 openings. And then recognition, it's definitely a team effort to support our students. So we think recognition is really important at Aramark. So we recently had an Employee Appreciation Day, and we honored all of our employees with a gathering here at Lindholm with food and drinks, and a sincere thank you from Aramark, and the district staff was in attendance as well. So that was really neat. And then just as far as recognition, we also have an HR system that's an app that our employees can use to send peer-to-peer recognition, and we can send recognition to our teams as well. With a nice note. And then just a kind of a comment on our training and professional standards that we have as well. We do a back-to-school opening meeting. Every employee gets a new hire orientation, and then we have additional safety briefs and SOP modules that we send out. And then the final section of the presentation is just focused on the future. So the pandemic, free meal waivers will be ending June 30th. So we are returning to paid meals. And then to help promote parents and guardians to complete those free and reduced meal applications, we can support with email blasts. We have letter templates. We have other marketing collateral. You see some kind of snippets here. And then we'll have the applications at our back to school tables for registration and stuff with our menus as well. And then the final page is just a recap on kind of some of the options. I know that you guys are gonna go into closed session to discuss, but just these are kind of the 3 options on the table. So it's the annual kind of agreement, or a 1-year emergency agreement that would basically just take our rates and apply CPI, and then support with the market wage adjustment. So the CPI is food away from home Midwest for December. It's a very specific CPI number, and that for the Midwest for the month of December was at 7.7%. Just as a data point, in April it was at 9.3%. And then staffing, the wage adjustment gives us the ability to increase associate wages, increasing retention and recruitment. And really this brings our base. So if you have no experience and you want to come work on our team, the base starting wage would come up to $12. And then kind of that second option is the food enhancement. So K through 12 students, this enhancement allows us to provide students with the 100% beef burgers, whole muscle chicken, or made with whole muscle chicken products, which goes above and beyond the requirement from the USDA. This is really, I look at this as like an investment back into the center of the plate. And I have that cost listed there. And then the third kind of option as well is for 9th through 12th grade students. This enhancement allows us to provide larger portions for the meat alternate, which is the protein group of our menu for the high school students. So that would really take us from like 2 ounces of protein to 3 ounces of protein. So just increasing the portion size a little bit for those high school students. That would still be within the USDA regulations for our meal planning, our menus. So with that, I'll open it up for questions.
Ms. Kozlowski.
Thank you for the presentation. There was a list of questions that I'm not sure if you got from the last standpoint, but feedback that we get from our community over this last year, so there's going to be a couple key things, and I'll kind of walk through some of these, but concerns about food quality, right? So the types of foods that the kids are getting, even for breakfast, hasn't been what I would see as shown in the pictures.
Okay.
Right, so, and there's kind of the pieces when we take a look at the disruption in supply chain. How are we navigating through that, right? So you sign a contract, there's certain fees. We're expecting to get a quality of food at one level. And I would say this last year, I think there's some concerns that we were not. I'd like to understand how do those pieces play in part. We're going to take a look at trying to look at a new contract and what does that mean to ensure that our kids are actually getting what they need so that they can, thrive?
Absolutely. So I did get the list of questions. I tried to incorporate some of them, but I'll definitely touch on the ones that you just brought up. So I think one of your questions was what would happen if we didn't get to that quality? Or if we couldn't physically get the product in because of supply chain, out of our control. We always look to a substitute item that's a like item. There have been a ton of waivers this year for non-whole grain and all of that kind of stuff. We haven't needed those. Everything we serve is whole grain rich. But if it wasn't the same quality as we're talking about with the food enhancement of getting to that whole muscle chicken product, we would look to a different brand to get a substitute item. And if we couldn't get that, my first call would be Sherry, and I would say, we can't get in this product, and we'd credit you back the difference to make sure that you do get that. Because I think that's fair. If we can't get that higher level product that we're pitching right here, then we don't have that cost, so why would we charge you for that? And I think there was a concern at the last meeting about the cookies, and the second I found out about that, we had a discussion and those were removed. So that was not something that's typically offered. I think one of our managers had hey, that kids like it and they're whole grain and it counts for a breakfast item, and offered it, and that was pulled. So I apologize for that because that's not on our normal menu. Yeah.
So one of the things I took a look at is the numbers, right? So I've seen the increase, and I obviously would have expected the increase with the 8 schools. How do we account for waste? That's something else that we hear a lot of, is that there's requirements for the students that they have to get something. They can't just get a milk, or they have to get something, and so they're essentially forced to get something, which in turn goes right in the garbage. How are we kind of navigating through that through requirements? How can we build in waste management so that that is a lesser of a cost? Because it's bundled in, but I think it's also, kind of a sunk cost that I'd like to have some control on.
Yeah, absolutely. So we participate in offer versus serve. There's kind of 2 programs under the National School Lunch Program. You can do straight serve, or you can do offer versus serve. And we're on the same page. We don't want waste either. So we always try to lean towards offer versus serve, where you offer all of the components to the student, but then if they take the minimum amount, then you don't have to serve those other ones. So a great example is at breakfast. You can put all 5 items in a bag and hand it to a student, or you can say, here's 3, here are the required ones, and if you'd like, take an extra fruit or juice, and a milk on the side. So that's kind of how we mitigate it, just from the menu planning standpoint before it even gets into the schools. You also mentioned just taking a milk. So you can, each individual item could be sold a la carte if they wanted to just take the milk, but under the free meal program, if you want it for free, you have to take the required components. And that's just, we play by the DPI and the USDA rules, so we follow those. We can't just do the milk. Thank you. Yeah.
Ms. Reincheck.
Thank you. Yes, looking at these numbers of the participation, just as you were just saying that they need to take that, I would think, of course, they would go up because they might want one item on there, and so then they have to take it all. This is participation in what they're taking, but it's not necessarily being eaten. This is just, it could go in the garbage, and that's our issue with the waste when we do go with this program, is not your program, but the federal government program, yeah. So, do we know why the upper grades went down? Have you heard back from that?
Yeah, so there's two things. The other thing about waste with offer versus serve is also like the ability to offer share tables. And I know with all of the food safety concerns during COVID, or I think they're calling it a no thank you table now, where if a student takes the item, at lunch, they can set it aside if they don't want it. And are we doing that now? No, I didn't think so. Okay. And there's a lot of food safety questions there about, a student takes it, it's in their possession, and then, do they lick it and set it back down, or do they just set it back down? So there's that option as well. But then your other question around the secondary students, or really the high school students with the decrease, honestly going from 3 lunch periods to 1 lunch period was difficult. I mean, I know that these ladies can speak to it because they're in the schools every single day, but we used to have 3 lunch periods where we only served, X amount of students, and going down to 1 lunch period, a lot of the students leave. I mean, it's just difficult to feed them all in that amount of time.
They're leaving because it takes too long to get their lunch?
Yeah. You can answer.
Okay.
Yep.
It allows them more time to like go out to places or go home and eat instead of like waiting in line or like staying in school. Like if they like South, for example, like a lot of them, Pick and Save is right next door. So if they have this whole like entire hour versus like the 20 minutes or something to wait in line, sit, eat their food and go back to class, like they have more freedom and opportunity to go somewhere else.
Thank you.
I've seen that line going from South to Pick and Save. It can be pretty big, too, yes. So it's the amount of time. So the longer period of time, they have greater choice, really, in where they want to eat, where they might want to get their food from.
And all those students are released at the same time, so they all come down. So naturally, the lines are going to be longer for those first 20 minutes,
Gotcha.
And then you'll walk in 40 minutes in and we'll have no lines, but everyone's already eating lunch, so.
That's an important point to make, but also for next year, I believe we're getting close to finalizing 2 lunch periods, which will be shorter, which will make the numbers harder to compare again, so just so you're aware of that.
What is the period of time that we have now versus what we're looking at for the 2 periods?
Right now, it's near an hour, and I can't remember what it's going down to off the top of my head. 30 minutes, thank you.
Okay.
Just one little comment. If you're ever in Pick and Save around lunchtime or before school, you'll notice their lines are very long as well. Lots of kids.
Other questions of our Aramark team? Or our central office team, too? Dr. Piazza?
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation and for some of the explanation for decisions. I think the substitutions, regardless of what program we go with, I think are always going to continue to be a question mark. I really appreciate how you acknowledge the cookies. What's interesting to me is that we went an entire school year with parents telling us, I'm one of them, right? My kids are having cookies for breakfast, and we didn't go anywhere with that. So it seemed like it was, maybe we just need to have you sit at all of our board meetings so you can make adjustments on the fly. But how do parents bring those kinds of concerns to your attention?
Absolutely. So our food service director is Jared Haxton. It's easy for me to volunteer him because he's not here today. But we can share that information and make sure maybe it's not hidden on, maybe it's hidden on the website or something like that. So we'll make sure that that's widely available and that his contact information is listed front and center because he's the perfect person, and then he'll relay the message to the appropriate team.
Okay. Yeah. I think things like that also lead to some of the questions around the enhanced food quality. So if I understand correctly, the enhancements are the base ingredients, but it's not a completely different menu. So it's
Correct. It's a tweak. So like there's a difference between a chicken patty and like a chicken breast sandwich.
Mm-hmm.
Just like the quality of the ingredients. So it's kind of what we looked at. I mean, we've been talking about this for a few years of just, is there another way to spend down some of the balance, or how do we invest it back into the center of the plate? And at this type of, we talked about what could impact all students, at all grade levels. Can we just enhance the ingredients that we're buying? It also helps with supply chain because some of these are easier to get than our K-12 specific products because you can sell them at restaurants and in retail operations. So those are actually easier for us to obtain.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Ms. Reincheck.
Thank you. Did you recently put out a survey to parents?
We did. Yes, our corporate team put out a survey, and then we did promote it within the district. So I haven't seen the responses back from that. It was like through a third-party vendor, but as soon as we get those back, we'll share those.
What did you ask and why?
There was a number of questions. I think there was like 20 questions. It took about 8 to 10 minutes to take. And we had secondary students, and then we had one for elementary parents to take as well.
So you were asking secondary students and then elementary parents specifically?
Yep. So the secondary students generally have a device, so they could take it right in line and give us real-time feedback. So we had QR codes that they could scan and give us feedback on what they felt about the experience. We asked them what they liked, what they didn't like, what they felt to the cafeteria, what they felt was important to them to see in the cafeteria represented, if there was anything missing on the menus that they really wanted to see. And then from the elementary perspective, I believe the questions were the same, but just slightly tailored more towards the elementary menus.
Did our administration know that you were doing that?
I'm not sure if we told you ahead of time. Okay.
Shortly after.
Okay.
I knew that the survey was going to be coming.
Yeah.
But I didn't realize it had gone.
Okay. Yeah. We usually do it every spring. So it's like, but with COVID and everything, we didn't do it, I think we missed either 1 year or 2 years. But normally it's like every spring we do student viewpoint is what we call it. That's our name for it every year.
When you're asking students right there in the line to scan the QR code and give you feedback on that food?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
Dr. Piasek.
Just to follow up on Ms. Ranachek's comment, I'm not trying to throw all of this in your lap, but there were some issues with that survey in that some of the schools that were listed were actually aligned to different districts. So I don't know how useful it's going to be. It was very confusing, I think, for parents who became aware of it, who wanted to provide some feedback. They couldn't even get into it because when they would pick our district, their school wasn't available. So that might be something, I mean, from my perspective, I think it would be important to just work together to understand how that's going out. I think parents a lot of times have questions, why is my child being asked to answer these questions, and what does that mean? But I think it's very valuable. It's another way to get feedback, especially directly from the students. But as you probably are aware, we were going through some conversations about surveys at that point too, so I think it was just unfortunately very confusing to some of our family members who didn't know where it was coming from. But and it's not for you three, but I know how that happens sometimes at a corporate level if people aren't talking to each other. So I think that's important.
Ms. Ranachek.
Thank you. One last thing, and we would probably also like to know that feedback as well, because if they're not enjoying the food, or if there's something that we can learn from that too, then if we're working together on that survey, then we can all benefit. And we're not sending out a survey a week later asking those same questions because we know what you asked or not.
Yep, absolutely.
Mr. McCaffrey.
Can we use the food service fund to finance the enhanced food? Is that allowed under DPI or whoever?
Yes, it is. We're allowed
Shackled.
to use the fund balance. I'm sorry, I'm really hoarse tonight. The fund balance to provide enhanced foods to our families.
Do you know how many times you've had a credit back because you couldn't get? My concern is we can't get the enhancements. I mean, I have some experience in this, and I know that some of the stuff is hard to get because, like you said, it's available because restaurants, but as these restaurants come back online,
Right.
you're in competition to get this stuff, which is going to get worse as time moves on. So I was just wondering, are you aware of any times that you had a credit back to a school district because you couldn't get the enhanced, or the better quality, or?
Yeah, so we haven't done the food enhancement yet.
No, I'm talking company-wide.
Oh,
I mean, I know
company-wide.
you guys
Yeah.
talk, I mean, the managers talk.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say that this is more of a recent opportunity because of the return that many districts have seen. I mean, most of our districts in Wisconsin that we service have a surplus. And they're saying, how do we spend this down? A lot of your kitchens just went through recent renovations. And so it's like, okay, well, we don't need an oven. What else can we use it for?
Right.
Let's reinvest in the center of the plate.
I was just wondering how many times you had to credit back
Yeah.
to a district because you couldn't get the enhanced food.
So I can tell you, I have never had to credit a
Okay.
client back because we couldn't get it.
And that's contractual, that you get credited back if we don't have it?
We can make it contractual. I mean, it's part of the tracking, so anytime that we wouldn't be able to get something in, I mean, like I said, my first call would be, let's try to get a substitution,
Right.
let's
No,
see
for
what we
sure.
can get, from our supplier, and if we couldn't get something comparable, we could track that and then share it on a Google Sheet with Sherry and make sure that she's aware of everything.
Can I
Yeah,
just
sure.
add to that? Some of the schools, like, I'm going to use Oconomowoc as an example, they're not on a fixed price contract. So we're looking at a fixed price contract. So they're on a contract where it's a cost reimbursable contract, meaning if they're getting charged for what it is that they're utilizing. So sometimes it's a little bit different with some of the schools that are offering those higher level foods versus the fixed contract. The difference is, where does the risk lie? And especially during the pandemic, it was to our advantage to be on a per meal cost contract versus to be on a fixed price contract. I mean, a cost reimbursable contract. Do you want to add anything to that, Beth Ann, or?
No, I think that sums it up. I mean, the fixed price contract, we have the risk, so.
Right. And do you think that's going to change when we come out of the pandemic? It was to our advantage when we were in it. Is it to our disadvantage when we're out of it?
I don't necessarily think so, because we're looking at a one-year contract. I would say potentially if we're looking at a 5-year contract right now, which is why we wanted to pursue the emergency procurement contract, then yes, I can't predict what's going to happen 2-3 years down the road. And so going into this one-year contract allows us to hopefully let things level off a little bit.
Yeah, and get base data for what we hope is a very normal year.
Yeah.
Except that the high school lunch scenario is changing, and the free breakfast scenario is changing.
The free meal in general is going to be changing. I mean, to me, that's the biggest swing in our participation, is that variable, and that will be, as of today,
Yeah.
will be going away.
So I'm trying to wrap my arms around the portion size, the enhancement, and trying to determine if it's worth the $61,000. And great question on whether we can take that out of the fund balance. That was a very good question to know. Because there's so many regulations, and I can appreciate your answer. You said, I think it was a chicken breast, a chicken muscle, and you had said that it'd be maybe going from 2 ounces to 3 ounces. That's a 50% increase. That's pretty substantial. Was that a real example?
Yes, yes. So the 2 ounces is it's called a meat equivalent. That's how we talk about it or an ounce equivalent in the USDA, how we do our menu planning. So think of like a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. The peanut butter is the protein. So everything's turned into like an ounce equivalent. So we'd be going from 2 to 3. Another example would be like chicken nuggets, right? So instead of offering 5, we'd be offering 8. So it just increases the portion size of that main center of the plate item for this second or the third.
So essentially, the entree portion
Yep.
is what we'd be looking at from a size increase.
Yeah.
So like a vegetable, you wouldn't like get 2 apples, you would just still get 1
You can
apple.
still take 2 apples today if you
Oh.
want 2 apples. So
Oh,
you
okay.
can take, at the high school level, they can already take 2 fruits and 2 vegetables and a milk and an entree included with their meal.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I can appreciate that you have regulations that you have to stay within too, so you can't offer too large of a portion. And you said all of yours obviously meet those federal and state standards too.
Yeah.
So,
So,
how-
sorry.
no, that's okay. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, a lot of students will buy like a second sandwich or buy a second entree, and I think this will help reduce that because they'll just be getting more in their initial entree.
Okay.
So I think that kind of equalizes it a little bit.
Sure. Have you seen other districts going to this?
We have.
And prior to, COVID, was this an option
I
or?
would say not prior to COVID. I would say in Wisconsin, because so my territory is just the state of Wisconsin. We have 18 districts around the state, and all the the food service directors report to me. So in Wisconsin, I would say pre-COVID, we weren't talking about enhancements or portion sizes. But since coming out of this pandemic, we have seen more districts look at this and say, what else can I do with my fund balance? I want to put it towards the student meal.
Okay, because we are in that position where we've pretty much maxed out most opportunities for equipment, maybe not all, but most over the years, so. Yes, Darren?
Just to clarify, and it brought back a memory.
Yeah.
Pre-COVID, we were talking about the next RFP, and we were talking about food enhancements here. Prior to all of this, we just got a 2-year pause button in that discussion, but once you said that, I remembered us meeting and talking about how we raise the bar in terms of the food quality.
Yeah, sure.
When you're talking about the portion sizes, I know there was a question about doing this at the middle school at the last meeting also, and Beth Ann and I discussed that. Do you want to share? I think it has I believe after our discussion, there was the issue with allowable portion sizes with the USDA requirements.
Yes,
at the middle
so
school
the
level.
calories and saturated fat and sodium, it would max out. It would start to hit those levels and we wouldn't be able to stay within the guidelines at the middle school level. So it is an option at the high school level to increase portion sizes, but at the middle school level, it's difficult to still meet many regulations, which we're subject to.
Dr. Piasek?
Can you tell me a little bit more about that? What is the grade or the age where it's decided they can have 8 chicken nuggets and not 5?
8th grade.
8th grade.
Yeah,
And
so our menu planning standards are K through 8, K through 5, 6 through 8, and then 9 through 12. So at that 9 through 12, you just get a bigger range for calorie content.
So okay, I misunderstood
It's ninth
you.
grade.
So it's ninth
Ninth
grade.
grade, sorry, yep.
And I think that's where we hear a lot of the biggest concern is 7th and 8th grade, boys in particular, but I hear it from the girls as well, and those are some growing bodies, so it's unfortunate. So they can have cookies and chocolate chip muffins, but they can't have
Well, they can't have cookies
calories.
anymore, so. No, but in all seriousness, the standards are set by the USDA, and, the Food and Nutrition Services of the DPI they audit us, so we have to make sure we menu plan to their standards.
Yeah, I appreciate that. It's just,
Yeah.
it's interesting strategy.
All right, any other questions, comments? And we do have a closed session on this. So thank you for your presentation and for being here and answering our questions. We appreciate it and the cooperation that you've had with our team at central office throughout the years. So thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, moving on to a monthly budget report. Sherry, do you have any voice left?
Well, Dr. Smith gave me some water, so that has helped tremendously.
I think you're tossing this one to Darren, huh?
Okay, I think I'm fine, but thank you. Okay, the monthly budget, I'm going to try to get through this pretty quick because it's, I hate to say it, but same old, we're in a good position right now. As far as our revenue dollars, we've got in our monthly May tax from City of Waukesha, but an interesting thing we received was also the TIF payment for the shops, so.
14? District 14?
And that
Yes,
was-
patience is a virtual, right?
Yes. That was $2.2 million, which is one of the reasons we didn't come back right away with budget revisions this month, because it threw a little wrench in. We need to look at the big picture again now with that additional revenue. So we'll be looking at that in the month of June, and we'll discuss in July. Our textbook and student fee collections are catching up to budget, which they normally do this time of year as it gets closer to the end of the year. Building rentals continue to run a little bit low, but we're up high enough on everything else to help cover that. Interdistrict sources are just our EAT part-time non-open enrollment. Our Carl Perkins grant we received from CISA, a payment towards that grant of $14,461. State sources, the only state payment we received was our computer aid for $613,910. And if you're not familiar with the computer aid, that's basically, several years back, they looked at some of the exempt property out there that
taxes aren't coming in on, and computers and software and related equipment are one of those items. And so the state said, okay, well, school districts, to help offset this revenue that you're losing, we're going to give you this aid. And at one point, it was a more complicated computation, and we got a different amount every year, depending on what the actual property out there was. And then several years back, they went, nope, you were cutting you off at where you're at. So now every year for the computer aid, we get the exact same amount of the $613,000. Federal sources, we received Medicaid payments of $221,608. That's part of our annual reconciliation every year. Well, it's still behind a year or two where they reconcile how much did we get in monthly payments versus how much we paid out for the course of the year, and then we get reimbursed by the state for that. We received a small amount for our homeless grant, which is part of ARPA, for $1,600. Title I, $362,000. CSI, which is Continuous Improvement Grant, tied to Title I, and eAchieve and East are the recipients of that money, and we received a payment of $58,419. It's a much larger grant, but it's a claim-as-you-go grant, and that was our last claim. And then a small amount of ESSER, too, went through at a little over $3,000. For other revenues, really just small miscellaneous payments for $3,400, but we've received 73% of our budgeted revenues compared to 67% last year. Part of the reason of that is in the past, they took our state aid and they divided it up, not monthly, but certain months throughout the year. And then in July, they would do another calculation at the end of the year. In July, we would get another chunk that had to be booked as a receivable, and this year they eliminated that, and the payments are made all throughout the year. So we're still getting the same amount of state aid, it's just coming in at a little faster, and we won't have that July payment. Expenses, salary and benefits, still in good shape. Purchase services, our main areas were the personal services, utilities, and people travel. Overall, we are where we expect to be. Non-capital objects, there was a good spend of $1.2 million in there, and most of that was technology, and we've already discussed part of it, the $588,000 for Apple and $118,000 for iPad cases. We've spent 88% of our budget. Capital objects, there was a credit this month in there, and that was for resale of older technology that we no longer need. Minor activity to insurance and judgments, but as I've talked about in the past, the overall percentage looks really high because of the South Pool. This is where the expenses come out of, but then the revenue comes into a different account. So overall, we've got the revenue to offset this, but because they're in two different accounts, it makes this account look way over budget. No transfers this month. Minimal spending in other objects. Overall, we're at 64% of our approved budget, which is close to where we were last year at 65%. Fund 27, we had a grant payment for flow-through and flow-through of $302,000 and Medicaid of $71,000. We've received 27.26% of our special education revenue, pretty much right the same percentage as last year. For those that are new to the committee, it's important to note that most of the revenue that comes in for Fund 27 is a transfer from our general fund. So it's the money comes from the general education fund, and at the end of the year, we look at your Fund 27 cannot carry a fund balance. It has, and it can't be negative. It has to be a zero at the end of the year. So we take our Fund 27 money, our budgeted transfer money, and at the end of the year, we look at where we're at and we transfer what we need to make Fund 27 whole. So we never are at much revenue until after we do the July one. The June transfer. Minimals, let's see. Expenses, same thing with salary and benefits. We're good to cover the rest of the year. We're coming down to the wire on how many payrolls are left.
Purchase services, just mainly the tuition and transportation is normal. Non-capital supplies are still the main area of the non-capital spending. No capital objects in May, no insurance costs, and no transfers. So we've spent down 75% of our sped budget compared to 78% last year.
Any questions for Sherry? So the fixed amount of $613,910, do you think we would have been shorted? Or do you think it's pretty fair?
I think it's pretty fair because my experience was it didn't change that much from year to year prior to doing this, so I think it's pretty fair.
It's probably an efficiency gain, so that side is welcome,
We know what to
right?
expect and what to budget for every year, correct?
Sure, yep. Dr. Piasek.
Thank you. I have just a clarifying question on that, too. So aside from the computer aid, and I know there's the common library funds, it's kind of a similar but different situation. Are there other types of payments that are kind of legacy set that come in for specific?
There's also a personal property tax amount that we get, which is similar to the computer aid. Now, the one thing to note on these items, they're considered state aid, and they impact what we can levy for. So they come off the top of our revenue limit, like our state aid, our computer aid, and our personal property tax aid. Those items come off our base revenue, our revenue after our exemptions, and then, so whatever they are, it doesn't really increase our revenue, it changes what we can levy to the taxpayers. Does that make sense? It's something, we call it inside the revenue limit. So that's the only other one I can really think of that.
Medicaid? Where does that fall?
Medicaid it falls both in Fund 27 and in Fund 10, and that's really a service-based reimbursement. So every month, our Student Services Department, working with Compass Care, creates claims for certain types of services that we provide, and then we get money on a monthly basis. That goes into Fund 27. But then at year end, we file a final year end report of what we've spent on Medicaid costs, which includes some things like transportation and those things that aren't included in the monthly reimbursement. And so the state does a reconciliation at the end and says, okay, based on all of your Medicaid expenditures, you're owed this, but we've already given you this much back in claims, so we're going to take that off the bottom, and then here's your annual reconciliation. Problem is, they're like a couple years behind, and it's a goofy one. But the reason some of it goes back to Fund 10 is it used to all go into Fund 27, but it dramatically could impact a school's Fund 27 revenue, and then their MOE would be off that year, and that's a problem, because you just never knew when they were coming. There was really bad at one point where they were years and years and years behind, and suddenly you might get $1 million in 1 year, which really impacts your amount of revenue received. And then next year, if you don't have that same amount, then it looks like you're not keeping your per pupil spend up in special education, and that's a problem.
So two years, having them be 2 years behind is better than where we used to be. We used to not even collect for it. So there was a point in time where we said we should be collecting for this. And the reason why we want to collect for it is, it is a revenue source, and we would then be able to lower our tax levy. And it doesn't impact our revenue limit at all, but how much we get taxed or how much we levy for our revenues from the general public. That
It
gets
comes
impacted.
outside of the,
Yeah.
it does, all of our expenditures and our revenues ultimately impact the revenue limit, but as far as the calculation of what our base revenue limit is. So everything goes into it a little bit. Am I misstating that, Darren? Everything goes in a little bit. It just isn't a direct line item on there, so it's part of, one of our next topics will be looking or talking about some revenue limits estimates for next year, but
in the upper left-hand side of it, it's looking at what were your expenditures the prior year, and that calculates into creating your base revenue. And then there's individual line items that are exceptions or exemptions to that revenue limit, which brings you down to your overall allowable revenue limit. And then your state aid comes off of that, and then you can tax that amount.
Just getting back to Medicaid, it's a good thing that we're going after it. It does help us in general. And we used to not do that. And 2 years, we've seen worse than 2 years. And I would bet that that's primarily due to COVID. We were caught up to speed a couple of years ago prior to COVID, right? They were pretty much on.
At least 1 year behind, 1 to 2 behind, and it hasn't gotten worse with
Okay.
COVID.
I thought there was a time where we were actually caught up, but,
I think they consider 1 year caught up.
oh,
Maybe that might be the
okay.
confusion.
I guess I didn't
they have to
catch that caveat a couple of years ago.
They have to analyze that data, and it does take
Sure.
time in their.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Other questions on the budget? Okay, thank you, Sherry.
And our health insurance is still very healthy, as is our dental insurance, and so we're still in good position with those. When you look at the health insurance report, you might see where, you will see, it's different as far as how much we put in from a employee deduction perspective the last 2 months, because we're looking at keeping some of that money in the original liability account before moving it into our overall fund, and that is going to help our position at year end as far as how much we can keep in the overall account or not. So there's rules that say you can keep out what you, in addition to your IB&R, you can keep out things for summer payments and other expenditures that you're expecting to use out of that. So we're doing that, and June will probably true up a little bit, and you'll see some figures in the next month's report finalized into there when we determine what do we need for IB&R and how much we want to put toward fund balance.
Thank you for being on top of that, yes.
Trying.
Any other questions? All right. Thank you, Sherry. Moving on to our 2022-2023 budget development. Any changes, Darren?
We just, at this time of the process, the hardest number to predict is always equalization aid. Revenue limit, we know with a high degree of accuracy, I think, what that number is going to look like. So attached in your board docs is 3 revenue limit calculations, but there's a summary page that talks about tax levy scenarios, and the top half of that page is the pieces that go into the revenue limit calculation. And as we talked about during our budget planning, long-range budget planning in early 2022, we're looking at $3.4 million loss of revenue limit authority. Last year we had $129.4 million. We're looking at $126 million. And it's even slightly worse than that if you look at the line right above the total revenue limit authority. Keep in mind, we talked about net revenue limit because now all the voucher stuff goes in and out of our books. So if you factor in that we're projecting that choice program to increase by $300,000, really our revenue limit loss for our purposes is more like $3.7 or $3.8 million, which is the largest drop in revenue limit authority. I didn't go check, but I'm sure this is true, since Act 10, when, revenue per pupil revenue was cut by $500 and some dollars per kid back then, along with ways to reduce costs, in all fairness. So the bottom half of the calculation is, well, what are taxes likely to look like? I don't hide this, but I'd love to have us talk about a pretty conservative estimate of taxation in September and come back lower in November. I think that always is a good thing. So what we did is we ran 3 scenarios of equalization aid, and that's the yellow band through the middle of the page. We said, all right, let's say aid's going to go down 5%, meaning taxes. There's an inverse relationship. So if aid goes down, taxes go up, assuming everything else is equal. Even with that, what we think is a very conservative estimate, I think, based on what the second year of the biennial budget has for equalization aid. We would have a levy decrease of $855,000, or just under 1%. If aid stays flat, we would have a levy decrease of 3.5 million, or nearly 4%, or if aid goes up by 5%, you can see the number, the tax levy, not rate, but the actual levy would drop by just over 7%. So I wish I could tell you this is financial wizardry, but when you're losing $3.4 million of taxing authority, it just kind of falls in line. I mean, so I think the 5% growth is, I wouldn't recommend we go to our budget hearing with that. And it could be any of these numbers. I think flat's a fair number to roll out, and I think 5%, if you wanted to be very conservative. I should also add, Sherry built into this, towards the bottom there, you can see Fund 39. This includes us continuing to defease or prepay debt at the same pace we have been doing, which is an extra $5.5 million of advanced principal payments, or our prepayable debt's kind of run its course. Now would be us holding assets for future payments, or there's several options there. That even includes that. So we could, and I don't know, we could increase our defeasance level, but I don't know if we would be getting too far ahead of ourselves in terms of conversations we need to have about long-range budget. But, if you factor all that in, I think it's safe to say, unless I'm wrong, the levy should go down. If you look at the rate, and I tend to believe levy is the truest and best measure of taxation, not that tax rate isn't a measure, because it can be helpful in some situations. We're assuming a 4% growth in valuation. Our 10-year and I believe 5-year average is 5-point-some%, so that's slightly conservative if history is any lesson. I do think 4%, based on what houses are selling for and everything, is probably a fair. We're looking at a tax rate. Last year we were at 750. Somewhere between 670 and 713. These are all great talking points. I love talking about these, but really the number that I think we need to be most concerned about is the significant loss in revenue limit authority from the previous year, and that's being driven by enrollment, which we're projecting a loss of 218 students next year, which is based off of our studies that we've had that have been pretty consistent. So a good tax outlook. We can build this, any of these scenarios, or one that's in between these bookends, I guess, to develop the budget that will go into our budget hearing in September. It'll come to you in July, approval in August to go to the September budget hearing. Again, it's more procedural than it used to be. Final approval comes in October when we get our certified state aid, we get our valuation, all that data. We get our third Friday pupil count. All that data comes together after our budget hearing. But so that's, I think, the main thing we wanted to share tonight, is just to give you an idea where we are tax-wise. We don't have to answer that specific question of what do you want to include in the budget for the budget hearing. We can bring that back next month if we want some time to think about that.
Other questions or comments on next year's budget, the process itself? Yeah, we still don't have all the information like every year that we need to be as exact as we would like to be at this time, but that just is par for the course. And is there any comment on any of the three scenarios? Any preferences there? Yeah, Sherry?
Just one clarification. The number that I used, that excuse me, the 218 loss of students, that's the average over 3-year difference. So the revenue limit uses the 3-year average, and that's, so the actual loss of students that we're projecting for next year is less than that, but the overall average has gone down by 218, just to clarify. Two figures that are both involved in the revenue limit, so.
Yeah, and just, if you look at the, not that you have to go look, but just looking at the fall counts, so the revenue limit's covering from 2019 to 2022, when we take the count this fall. People talk about enrollment and all that, and why is it happening? Is it happening in the fall count? This is just resident pupil. That doesn't mean they don't open and roll in and out, and this is just the actual number of kids in our district. We had 11,915 in the September count. And for the September, well, I'll take the last known piece of data. The September of 21, we had 11,325. We're projecting dropping to 11,182. So there's just fewer students out there, and there's more options available to students.
And there's many more assumptions that go into the budget that will be listed out as you develop the preliminary and so these are just a few of the assumptions that we typically talk about at this time, but there are many more. So as we get finer in our detail, I think one of the sections that we as a committee really need to look at is the assumption side of things. And Darren and Sherry have done a really good job with the information that they have in trying to set this picture up for us for this upcoming year. So we appreciate your hard work on this.
Just one thing more on the referendum debt. We've talked a lot about, our goal, or I think it's a reachable goal, of paying off the debt in 6 years. This will be the 4th levy of the 6 if we stay on that pace. So we'll be debt-free in
25, 26.
Fall of 24 would be your last levy on that debt. The payments would come in 25, but the levy would come in 24.
So 25, 26, we would be debt-free.
Completely debt-free.
Yeah.
Yep.
All right, anything else? Okay, thank you. Moving on, every month we've decided to talk on our ESSER funds, and we're going to continue to do that. Darren, do you have any other
just a quick
observations to make on it?
There hasn't been a lot of action or activity on that since the board approved the teaching and learning proposal, I think in March or April. The only thing that's different is we had a request to come up with some more dashboard type of formatting. So there's some graphs in there that we have developed, actually just developed them, that we'll probably put out on our ESSER page just so people can see more topic area driven visual type of information related to ESSER. Some of them, like I'm looking at ESSER 3, it's all learning recovery at this point, so the pie is all blue. So it's things like that. But, if we go down the HVAC conversation, or if we get into safety and security or other topics, we can divide that out and people will have hopefully a quick visual of what we're spending on and what our conversations have been about. Other than that, there's really nothing new to report.
Can I just point out, Darren, that the second page of charts is where you see what's already been approved and budgeted versus what's left to budget. So when Darren's talking about the HVAC, where it shows 100% in learning recovery on that first graph, if you look at the second ones, it's 100% of the portion that's been approved and allocated. And so this page will show you what's left to be unallocated, and that's where the other part would come in.
Dr. Piasek?
Thank you. I have a question just about some of the curricular materials that we approved, that first bolus of materials. What I'm understanding from Mrs. Landish, and even I think other districts are facing this, that the cost of raw materials and things are going up quite significantly. So there might be a point where we either need to relook or, I don't know, possibly rebudget. I mean, if we're talking about potentially 30, 40% higher prices on things that we had kind of preliminarily budgeted for. Maybe we should talk a little bit about what that strategy would be to make sure we don't either go over or end up too far in between buckets. Maybe it's too premature, but I know it's coming.
I have no doubt that on some topic over the rest of this conversation that we're going to run into, especially which fiscal year things are coming in, because lead times are, but the amounts are all over. Actually, Jody stopped by my office, and I think the next large textbook adoption they have planned, they just got something saying that, it's going to be $50,000 more than what we just talked about. And so I do think we need a framework. Generally, I like to think that the board has given me kind of a range of, the cost or the flexibility or the events of doing business. But in terms of this, where I think there is more scrutiny, and I don't mean scrutiny in a bad way, so hopefully it wasn't taken that way. I need to know where your parameter of, this is within the realm of understanding, or do we come back? I also thought about, do you create a column that, like an inflationary column or something on each line item and say, it came in a little higher and lower, and then maybe F&F approves those new numbers. But I'm not sure the timing's going to be where you'd be able to approve the higher amount, though. The PO's been cut. It would be more, in my mind, it's more notifying you that this is where it's at. I think that's how we'll see it more often.
So I have an idea on that. What if we were to talk about, and we talk about contingencies, right? Maybe and usually it's like a 5 or 10%, sometimes 15%. Maybe we need to define a contingency percentage and then allow you to utilize that for inflationary issues. And then, as that gets used up, you'll have to stop, I guess, and then we come back and talk more on what that looks like. Would something like that be workable?
I think the challenge that we have is what we used to think is a reasonable contingency at this point in time may not be reasonable. We just don't know, and some of these numbers are kind of shocking. So I think on a positive note, we want to put as much of these resources as we can into learning recovery and teaching and learning materials, and that's probably where we have a solid plan. But I think we need to watch it as these items are approved, but maybe, I don't know what the right number is. I do think that maybe monitoring it for a few purchases would be helpful.
Well, at a minimum, we're going to be looking at this every month.
Yes,
this is
standard
here.
agenda item, right?
And I would assume if we ever needed to call a special meeting because we hit something really went out of whack, we could do that, or we can just wait for the month to come by and then we could address it here, at least from a dollars perspective here.
It would help to look at actuals then. If we've got a budget amount,
Yeah.
we could actually,
I was just thinking, maybe it's not any different than the budget amendment that we do in
Sure.
our overall budget. These columns become, I guess when we built this, and my staff built this, I didn't, but I was looking at these as actual costs, but really these are budgeted numbers. We can add a column with actuals and then reconcile it out periodically, or,
That's my other piece on this, is like, we're looking at something that says approved. How long is the time frame between it's approved, before it's purchased, before we've seen it, before you've actually got the cash out the door? That part is gonna give us some timelines in here too, versus it's just approved.
yeah.
I agree that this budgeted figure is one piece, but we need to see actual, and then we need to see if there is the difference in actual due to inflation from original piece, right? So here's the original approval. I had a quote, right? So we watch what she presents. We get a quote, we understand what the cost of these are that are approved. Now, when you go to cut the PO and the check, what's the difference in price? So here's the actual, here's the variance. Variance is driven by inflationary or other types of matters, plus or minus.
Pupil count or
Right,
whatever, right?
Yep.
I also have another suggestion here. Any vendor that we're working with, I think we need to try and see if we can get some terms like with the city, where they offered saying, hey, we would put a maximum on that. So how hard is the quote? and for how long is it good for? So we should be able to get a quote, and they should be able to say it's good for X number of days. Now, we may see those days being shorter than what they used to be in the past, but hey, my business, I've honored year-old proposals. Well, I don't know, do our vendors do that? You know, so it just, maybe not. Maybe we need to be more specific in what we're asking for in terms of a time frame. Yes, Sherry.
I can share just one part of this, is that we are managing all the purchase orders in the business office. So we are looking at budget to see, is this what was budgeted? And so far, they've been very good, they being like TNL, to say, look, it came in just a little bit more. It's been very insignificant, but we're already starting to see it. And so for those things that we deemed as insignificant, and I think that was just one mainly, if I remember right, we went ahead with it, but this is where we can come back and show. But as we see this and those things keep growing, then that certainly gives us the opportunity, because like I said, we are managing the purchase orders in the business office versus everybody doing their own, just so we can keep a better handle on the ESSER spending.
Well, and I think our vendors need to understand that if there's significant move in it, we might not place that order. I mean, it may have to come back to committee for approval if it's significant. So I think we need to, have our vendors understand that this is not easy for us either, and that we at least work out something that's fair. And, I do that with all my clients, so, I mean, we want to be fair, but at the same time, you have to understand that there are some risks, especially when you're dealing with a governmental entity that, I mean, Darren, you can't go forward with something that triples in cost all of a sudden, and the board just, had passed something that was substantially less. So I think those conversations need to happen. They're probably happening as we speak, and, so far it looks like there hasn't been too many of those, according to you, Sherry and Jess, so that's good.
I'm just thinking off the top of my head, it might be worth our time to reach out to legal counsel and see if there's language we can add to each PO saying that this is X days, or anything over this amount would need board, just to kind of reinforce. But really, the contract language is the real language that we need to start diving into a little more. But it's something we have to monitor, whether any of the...
You've been doing that all the time. I mean, it's just part of your job.
Just a little more refined, I think, in this particular area, because in talking with Steve Schloman in IT, he's talking about switches and stuff for closets. Some of them have 14-month lead times on that. Even the way we've talked about things falling in within a budget, I can't even guarantee that that's going to be the case anymore. So, and hopefully that clears up over some time, but it's just going to be a little different for a while.
We've had some interesting quotes outside of ESSER that I've never seen before for like food service equipment and things, where they come back and they say, we have 2 in stock. If you happen to be one of the lucky people that get one of these 2, it's this price. Otherwise, you're going to expect to pay 8-point-some% more. And so they'll give you a quote, but they're not even guaranteeing that you're going to get the item at that price, because if someone else turns in their purchase order before you do, it's become kind of the wild, wild west with purchasing in some cases.
All right, any other questions or comments on our budget, or on the ESSER funds? So next month, if you guys could come back and maybe take the input of the committee and kind of evolve on what we're doing with the ESSER update, that would be great. Thank you. Moving on to other business, any suggestions or recommendations for future items on this, for this committee to address? Yes, Dr. Piazza.
One thing, I think that we were going to try to look at the KPIs for each individual section by committee level. So even if they don't need revision, I think it would be appropriate to maybe take a look at the finance-related KPIs.
Sure.
Why?
It was trying to remember off the top of my head, a lot of them are, maybe you don't agree with this timeline. A lot of them, to me, it seems like we need to close out the fiscal year to get some of those base measurements. So I don't know if we talk about them all. I mean, I don't have a preference. If we talk about them all at the same time, or, but we can review those. I can, we'll agendize them, and if nothing else, review them next month, and we can talk about timelines for reporting out on them.
I think the goal would be to have.
And we can respond to the ones we have.
The new ones set for the next year. If anything's changing, that we're agreeing on that in August before we start the school year, so.
Okay.
Just review them.
That makes sense. Yep. Anything else to be agendized for future meetings? All right. We now need to go into closed session for 2 items. Do I still have a motion for those couple of items? Ms. Kozlowski.
A motion to adjourn to executive session pursuant to Wisconsin Statute 19.851E for deliberating or negotiating the purchasing of public properties, the investing of public funds, or conducting other specified public business whenever competitive or bargaining reasons require a closed session. District food service contract and sale of district properties.
Is there a second to that?
Second.
Second by Mr. McCaffrey. This is a roll call vote. Jess?
Mr. Gomes?
Aye?
Mrs. Kozlowski?
Aye.
Mr. McCaffrey?
Aye.
Dr. Piasek?
Aye.
Ms. Reinacek?
Aye.
Passes 5-0. Just so people know, I will not be involved in the closed session for the second item, dealing with the Oakdale property. And Mr. McCaffrey, would you mind just taking over the meeting at that point in time when I leave? Okay. And we also, second item, Jen and Jessica, we may have to return into closed session tonight. We don't know that, or into open session, I'm sorry, into open session. So I think you'll need to stay around for a while. Do you have maybe an estimate, Darren, of how much time?
10.
It's a note, important to note how little control I have over that, so.
Well, you notice I pawned it off on you, though, so it's a guess.
It shouldn't take an extreme amount of time.
Fair enough. If you guys could, if you ladies could wait, we would truly appreciate it. So you could go back on air if we need to for the open session. All right, thank you, everybody. We'll go right into closed session.
Good to go.
Okay, welcome back. We've finished with our closed session. We're back in the open session for our Finance and Facilities Committee on June 6th. We do have the potential to approve district food service contract for a 1-year period of time. Would I so happen to have a motion to that effect? Mr. McCaffrey?
I move to approve the 2022-2023 one-year emergency procurement contract with Aramark, option 3, using enhanced foods and larger portion sizes at the high school level, with per meal rates of $2.23 for breakfast, $3.57 for lunch, and an a la carte equivalency rate of $3.57.
Is there a second to that motion? Second by Ms. Reinacek. Discussion? All right, let's take the vote. All in favor, say aye. Aye. All opposed? Passes 5-0. Jess? And that concludes our meeting for this evening. Thank you for being with us, and have a good evening.